working at Bon Appetit, I got to learn a lot about like what does it mean to like have a point of view when you're writing, not just like write about what's happening, but then kind of like to assess like, oh, what does that mean like for that particular cuisine or like whatever field of like restaurants or media or whatever kind of like platform this is on.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Eliza Barbanel. Elyse Inamine is a writer and editor based in New York. A former restaurant editor at Bon Appetit and Food & Wine, she's now writing some of our favorite freelance food stories across the internet, including here at Taste. It's so fun to have Elyse on the show to talk about her recent Taste story on the rise of so-called cute food, her view on restaurant reporting, and more. Elyse Inamine, this is Taste. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Eliza.
I know, it's so fun. We get to talk on mic together, and I'm curious if you've eaten anything good today so far.
Today, I've only had yogurt. I was considering eating like a lot of kimchi before I came, but then I thought I will just eat it after this.
Were you going to have just kimchi?
I don't know. I found like some rice in the back of the fridge and I was like, is this good still? And like maybe I could like fry it with the kimchi. And it's kimchi that my friends and I made like about a month ago. So it's like finally, it's like getting softer and we kind of like made it really salty, but now I feel like it's at a good place. But then I was just like, I just feel like yogurt.
Okay, I was going to ask you about your preferred kimchi brand because I feel like I have not found the perfect one for me. But if you made it, then that's a whole other ballgame.
There's this one woman who does these kimchi deliveries. I forgot what her name is, but she's taking a hiatus right now, so otherwise I would recommend her.
I love that you have a kimchi delivery person, and I hope that she comes back from hiatus and you can send her to me.
Yes, she's great. I would buy, like, honestly, 10 pounds of kimchi at a time.
Yeah, I feel like when you get to that level, it's when you kind of need a separate kimchi fridge.
I should. It is really annoying. I think one time the last drop-off she was doing was a holiday weekend that we happened to be out of town, and I was trying to get friends to stay at our apartment to receive the kimchi. And my husband was like, this is not a good use of anyone's holiday weekend. Like, I don't think you should try to force or coerce our friends to do this for us. And I didn't.
Some people have cat sitters. Some people have kimchi delivery sitters.
Yeah, that's me. That's how you know, like, you're a certain level of, like, adult is, like, you need somebody to, like, get your kimchi order.
I mean, it is a living organism. Not exactly in the same way as a cat, but in a more general way. So
yeah. Like, you need someone to take care of it and to, like, make sure it, like, sits on the counter for a little bit and then move it into the fridge at some point. Maybe, like, change it into a different container. Like, kimchi is an investment still.
The kind that you made with your friends, what kind of vegetable did you use?
We just did napa cabbage. And then we also made dongchimi with radish, too, which is really good for, like cold noodle. But today it's kind of, like, warm, cool. So I don't know, maybe I'll eat that because actually I kind of forgot about that kimchi and now I'm excited about it. So
yeah, I'm glad that I got to prep you for lunch emotionally. But before we talk too much about food, I want to talk about food in the context of your writing. You're one of my former coworkers at Bon Appetit, and I get to edit you here on Taste. And I think more broadly, I'm just such a fan of your writing. And I'm curious if you would say there's a certain kind of story that you find yourself drawn to.
Yeah, it was interesting. That was a hard question for me because I feel like I don't even know like if there's like a certain like brand of story that I'm interested in. I think a lot of times, and this is sort of a boring answer, is like I gravitate towards what's interesting to me. And I think interesting in a couple different ways. I think one is like it's interesting to me if I don't know anything about it. And so I get to like dig around and kind of learn as much as I can from as many different angles as possible. The other part of interesting for me is like I already know it, but maybe there's like a new light or a different perspective. I think the latter is like mostly what I'm more interested in at this point because I feel like surprised. And I think it makes me like rethink like whatever that topic or subject is or like go at it from another angle that then is like very exciting for me to look at.
Yeah, definitely. Are you the kind of person that has a notes app on your phone with just random ideas of potential stories that you kind of chase down?
Yeah, I think I even had one specifically for Taste. And then I would try to like test out to see, do I think this is a good story? And I would do some research or like jot down ideas. And then I'm like, these are not good ideas. I will not pitch these stories to you.
Oh, I mean, I'm always interested in hearing your ideas, but I think maybe for people listening who are interested in writing in general or food writing specifically, I think that question of like what makes something a good story is kind of
Mm,
interesting to talk about. I feel like when we were up on Appetit together, we would often talk about like, is it a topic or is it a story, which I think is
right.
interesting. Like a lot of people want to write about a trend or something that they see is going on. And I think to me as an editor, I always say, well, it's not enough to point out a bunch of things that are happening. You have to talk about why it might be happening, why it's of interest, to talk about why it's happening. How do you kind of assess your pitches or your story ideas to see if they're worth pursuing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember when I first was interviewing at Bonap, I was asked like, "Are you a reporter or a writer?" And I thought that was like I had never gotten that question for at any publication I had worked at, and I thought it was really interesting because I didn't really know how to answer it. I don't really remember how I answered it, but there was there was like a correct answer. It was like, "Oh, we lean more towards writing." And I think that working at Bon Appetit, I got to learn a lot about like what does it mean to like have a point of view when you're writing, and such like you were saying, not just like write about what's happening, but then kind of like to assess like, oh, what does that mean like in terms of like for that particular cuisine or like whatever field of like restaurants or media or whatever kind of like platform this is on, and then like maybe what is like the larger takeaway from it. I think for me, how I find like a story that seems like it has something more that can turn it into like something interesting for me to write, or at least something that I'm interested in writing, is like, can I talk about it and think about it for more than like 30 minutes? And like, can I kind of like keep going and like finding new things, like whether it's like a different direction to go or like sources to like bring into it? I think also like, I don't know if I think about this, it more just like started happening. And then I was like, oh, I do like do this all the time. I like, I'll write something. And then I like to take like a sharp turn at a certain point. So I feel like if a story sort of has like different directions it can go, and like one direction is like an angle that I'm interested in pursuing. Like I remember for one story that I wrote for Bon App was about chewy food and like chewy as a texture and how it's like really beloved in different like Asian cultures. And it was
QQ.
really fun. Yeah, and cute food too, where it was like kind of going into
Oh, I
explaining
said
like
QQ.
oh, QQ, yes. Yeah, but cute food is also what
We'll
we're gonna
talk
talk
about
about
cute
too.
food. Yeah.
Yeah, and so kind of like I had a lot of fun like describing like different types of like textures of like chewy food, whether it's kind of like a beef ball that's like almost like a tennis ball, or like a tendon that's like really chewy and kind of like pulls at you. It was really fun to like kind of explain like, oh, like this is like kind of the world of chewy food, but then also explain like why does it seem like Western diners are so against it and like find it to be like gross, whereas this is a texture that's really beloved and sought after in a lot of Asian cuisines. And so I think it was like really fun to like also talk about like kind of this darker side of like perception with chewy food, and that it's not seen as like serious food. And maybe that's why people were pushing against it so much. And so I think that's kind of a long-winded way of saying like I feel like a story topic, like if it kind of pulls me in and allows me to like go in places I didn't expect, then I know it's interesting. But I feel like sometimes you don't know until like you're actually reporting it. Um,
Yeah, I think that's what I would say is maybe you have good sources and you think that there's some kind of tension there. But for me, at least, whenever I have my first interview and somebody says something that I didn't expect, that's when I feel like, okay, I can run with this a little more.
mhm.
So clearly, whatever answer you gave to the reporter or writer question worked out and you got the job and you were a restaurant editor at Bon Appetit. And I'm really curious how you approached that job. We obviously are based here in New York, but you're a national restaurant editor. Did you have like a whisper network of people in different cities around the country? Like, how did you approach covering food all over?
Yeah, that's a good question. I had been able to do that like prior at my other job. I was working at Food and Wine where Jordana Rothman was the restaurant editor. And so I got to inherit a lot of processes that were there. Like there were tons of spreadsheets. There are all these like folders and interviews and stuff. And so I think I got to see like how that publication approached Best New Chefs, which is their national chef platform. And so that allowed me to sort of see how somebody like organized this, like restaurant openings, things like that. And then when I went to Bon App, I just did it in my own way, like made it more a Google spreadsheet thing. And so I feel like a lot of it though was just like reading a lot. So reading a lot of local publications, looking at like different social media, definitely having like a network of people of other writers, editors, or just people I know who like worked in restaurants but have like go out to eat a lot and asking them like what they're interested in. But yeah, I don't know. Part of it too was just like looking at places, and even if like nothing's written about them, being like, oh, there's something like kind of interesting about this. Or like I remember when Turkey and the Wolf first opened up, that restaurant like didn't it had like some local press, but I don't think it was like super nationally known when it first had opened. And I remember that was my old coworker at Tasting Table's brother's restaurant. And he was telling me my brother is opening a restaurant in New Orleans. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I remember when Jordana was going to New Orleans, I like put that on like her research list of like my friend's brother's like this is his restaurant. And then it ended up being that year, at least for Food and Wine, like on our restaurants of the year list. I know it was also on Bon App's list too. And so that was really funny to see that, where it's like, oh, I just kind of have like a funny feeling about like this restaurant. Like it was like so like unusual for the time, and how it was like really fun and like not serious and like all about sandwiches, and but these like beautifully constructed sandwiches. And so I feel like just kind of looking at random things like that, or like kind of listening to like the people that I trust, has always like allowed me to like find restaurants and places that I wouldn't normally expect, or maybe aren't like, have like, huge PR companies backing them or anything.
That's so wild for me to think about, because I do think Turkey and the Wolf and their other restaurant, Molly's Rise and Shine as well, are kind of media darlings in some kind of way. Like their
Yeah,
food
now
is,
they are.
yeah, they're so Instagram friendly. I mean, the food is delicious, and it's a certain style of restaurant that I think people are really into. And it's really interesting to think about how that kind of attention can start in that kind of way. And it makes me think about, like, I'm curious what you think the role of national food media is these days. I feel like obviously it can bring a lot of exposure, but then there's like chef culture, all kinds of other elements.
I feel like national awards are so great because I think they allow someone or a team of people who are well versed in restaurants and restaurant culture to look at sort of the lay of the land every year and celebrate the places that are doing it really well. I think there's also something that's really tough about it when there's so many local publications that are dying out, or like don't have like the funding that they need, and they are also very important to like understanding like the local landscape of restaurants and like the community and the places that are actually like feeding the people who live there. So I don't know. I feel like sometimes I have I feel a tension between the two, because I think local publications are really important to like national publications too. Like as somebody who like worked on like more national restaurant award platforms, it's like I was always looking at local publications. So I think it's important, but I feel like if not at the expense of like local reporting and restaurant criticism.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I did an episode with Priya Krishna recently, and she was telling me about how she also is reading all of the local papers when she's looking to be kind of talking about food trends in a more broad way in the country, obviously in places that you don't necessarily live in.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to talk to you about like home cooking kind of coverage as well. You did this package at Bon Appetit that was a hot pot entertaining story with Eric Z, who does the Taiwanese restaurants 886 and Wen here in New York. And hot pot is so like collaborative and intricate because you're essentially cooking everything as you go. And I'm curious about how you and Eric kind of found a way to present that style of eating, which doesn't really fit into a traditional like Western recipe writing format.
Right. I think that's like why hot pot is so awesome, is like instead of one person cooking, everyone's cooking.
Maybe someone is like taking charge a little more than others, but
Yeah, that
you're
is
all
true.
involved.
I feel like my father-in-law is the one who's always like kind of keeping an eye on everything, to be like, oh, you put in like this root vegetable a while ago, we should fish that out. Or
Yeah.
if there's like meat that's kind of like looking like it's going to start to overcook, my husband will also start taking them out and putting them on people's plates. I had actually pitched a version of this story like a couple times at Bon Appetit, which I don't know if I would recommend to people because that might have been annoying, but it allowed me to then figure out what is a better way to present this story. I think because it's like this way of eating that I really love, but is not super familiar or intuitive to many people, especially I think many people who are looking to a food magazine for recipes. And so I feel like by kind of constantly rethinking like what is the best way to like show people how to cook in this way that I love allowed me then to like figure out, okay, this is a helpful way to do it. So the way Eric and I thought about it was, what if we did a really in-depth guide that's very visual, that walks through people through the start to finish of hot pot, from like before you're even cooking to actually the process of it. And I think with hot pot, what's interesting is like cooking is like a part of it, and that's probably the best part. It's I think the thing that you think about and visualize or remember the most, but the bulk of the work is way ahead of time. Like it's the tools that you need to buy, like a standalone butane burner or electric burner, like wooden chopsticks, like different sets of chopsticks for like raw meat and like the chopsticks that you need when you're actually eating, to like figuring out like what are the raw ingredients that you're gonna buy and like having a good mix and having like the right amount of food. And then, broths and things like that. So
All
that
of the
was
sauces
yeah, and all the
also.
sauces. So I think that was important. We felt like, oh, it's helpful to kind of like build up to like let us show you kind of the things that you need to like either buy ahead of time or like think about when you shop, and like creating like almost like a primer in a sense of like here is like everything you need to know before you even get to the cooking part.
Yeah, I really loved the final product of this package, which was kind of surprising in a way. I mean, I knew it was going to be great because I was in all of these pitch
I
meetings.
know.
And every time I
You
was like
heard every
rooting
single
for
one.
you. But I feel like going to eat hot pot in a restaurant just makes it so easy. And so to think about going to the effort of doing it at home was something that I was initially skeptical of. But then when you see it all laid out in that kind of way, and you can picture like having a bunch of friends over and like plucking mushrooms like off of the table and dunking it in the broth together, like it does feel like such a beautiful way to gather people at home. And I feel like that is one of the great things that food publications do, is just kind of expand the possibilities of what a dinner party or a weeknight dinner like might mean for someone.
Right. And I think what was really fun about that shoot too is so Jesse Yuchen was the recipe editor for that, and also really hands-on on the visual process. So they would send me like the PDF and stuff when things came out, and I was able to look at it, or sometimes go to the test kitchen at that point when I wasn't working at Bon Appetit and I was a freelancer, but I live really close to the office. So I sneak in every so often. But I was able to watch like, oh, Eric develop the broths and then kind of like see like behind the scenes of like how things were going with the shoot. And so I felt like another thing that like contributed to this story looking so great too was like me, Eric, and Jesse all love hot pot. We all like do it for fun. I think there was even a time either like before this story came out or after, like all three of us had hot pot together. So I feel like for us it was like a very natural way to like entertain. But we wanted to like kind of help people understand like, oh, a lot of this is just mise en place. That's pretty much all you need to do. But I think it's really overwhelming to look at the table. It's so like bountiful. It has so many ingredients, and you're kind of figuring out like, hey, what are all these things? When do they all go in? Like, how long should they go in for? And like, then what do I do after it's cooked? And that was our goal of Hot Pot, is to show people like, oh, this is how you make it happen. Like, it's not just this beautiful spread of food, but you're invited to partake in it too.
Yeah, I really want to go eat hot pot with all of you now, because I've
Yeah.
been slowly tweaking the like sauce that I make, like the dipping sauce that goes into everything.
Ooh, what do you put in yours?
Well, I feel like adding like sacha sauce has been the big
Mm.
addition, because that's just like, it's like a Chinese barbecue sauce essentially. So it has that kind of like smoky, umami, sweet factor, and then like a lot of scallions and things like that.
That is also my go-to. I just realized I had hot pot on Friday, so like a few
It's
days ago.
barely been cold yet. That's
I know, but I was like, I just need this. But for me, yeah, Sacha is like essential. The second that I learned about that and tried that condiment, it's the basis for my dipping sauce.
I'm glad we're aligned.
Hmm.
I wanted to talk to you about the first story that you wrote after going freelance, which ended up on the cover of the New York Times, which I feel like must be any freelancer's dream, certainly mine, which was about Korean chefs who are adopted and how they're engaging with their cultural identity through their restaurants. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what that reporting process was like, and if there were any like approaches or reactions to these chefs that you found helpful when you were kind of bringing the story together.
So this is my first story in general writing for the New York Times. And I didn't know what they wanted, and I was very intimidated by the process. So I thought I need to report this a little bit before I even send the pitch. So I had done a little bit of research of certain chefs who all ended up being in the story, and just kind of candidly asked them a little bit about their background, how they got into cooking, what led them to cook Korean food, and then came up with a pitch that I think is almost as long as the story, that included like quotes and like kind of a why me, why now, and here's like a potential list of sources. And I sent it to Patrick at the New York Times, like someone I didn't know, but luckily got an intro through a friend who works at the New York Times. He said it was good. He's like, don't use the intro like story, and like here's like your word count. And so I felt really excited to work on it. I was like, I don't really know what I'm getting myself into either. And just like kind of dove into researching. Like I interviewed a lot of chefs who are all over the country, who are cooking Korean food, who are all adoptees. And some of them I had been to their restaurants, some of them I hadn't. I also talked to like professors who were either like Korean adoptees themselves and like studying that particular population in the US, or like were devoted to the history and like context of Korean adoptees in the US. And so it was really interesting to like report and understand, like not just from like a culinary perspective, restaurant perspective, but also I think from like a social, like demographic perspective as well, and like a history of Korean adoptees in the US. So I learned a lot about like how Korean adoptees were like kind of the beginning of like international adoption, like that hadn't really existed before, and how they were such a huge group of adoptees, and now like actually Chinese adoptees will soon like surpass them in terms of numbers. So one professor I was talking to was like, you could probably write the same story about Chinese adoptees in 10 years. And I was like, that is fascinating. I did not know that. But it was really interesting to report this story, I think, because I feel like a lot of chefs cook similar these days, in that it is a reflection of like their heritage / ethnicity, and then where they grew up or their community or kind of their region. And most people don't question it. For these chefs, they were being questioned all the time, particularly on the Korean front, and especially from people who are also Korean. And I think that was like pretty shocking to hear like some of the responses that they got to their food, or just questions about their food. That was like just heartbreaking to hear. Like I remember Peter Serpico, who is a chef based in Philly, and who had a cookbook that had just come out. I think like maybe a month or two, or sometime earlier that year when the story came out, and he was telling me about how he had a Korean pop up during COVID. And I remember because I ate at it in Philly when I happened to like just be there for vacation. And I think it was really rainy. So my husband and I just wanted to eat in. So then we ordered from his pop up, and we really liked it. But he was telling me like there was one time where like a Korean woman, I'm not sure if she's a customer, she had called and questioned the food and was like, kind of like, it's not like authentic, quote unquote, because Peter is an adoptee. And I remember just being like floored to hear that story, because it was just so awful. And like one of the things that Peter said was like, it felt like I had to have like a Korean off with her. Like he had to like prove to her how Korean he was. And like, I think that's like really devastating. I don't know. I feel like it's just really hard to do that through food when it's like really personal, but also really public in a restaurant format. I think it was really sad to hear that, but it was also really encouraging and inspiring to hear these chefs who were like, this is the way that I am learning how to be Korean. And it is through like cooking in this way that like many other people are like kind of pulling from these different inspirations, like where it's like, this is how I cook now, or like, this is how I grew up, or like, this is what I'm learning. And I think that was really cool to see, and to like also try through the recipes that some of them had contributed to it. But it was like a really interesting, like hard story to report, but I felt like I learned so much in the process. And then I think it was really cool, like the response to that story was crazy. Like I wasn't expecting it. Like I remember when it was considered for the front page, like I didn't really know like if it would get to be on the front page, because like breaking news happens all the time. So like anything could get pushed. So I remember specifically being told like if somebody really famous dies that day, like you might get pushed. And so then I think a really famous basketball player had died that day. And I was like, oh, okay, it's definitely gonna get pushed. But it didn't. And I was like, oh wow, like that's cool. And like not that's cool that someone died, but like that the story still got to run on the front page. But then I started getting like emails, and like no one checks my website to like ever email me anything except for my mom. So I was getting like emails from people. I was getting all these DMs. Like I was getting also messages from people that were like, oh, I'm like Korean, but I'm not an adoptee. But like I feel the same way in terms of like I don't feel like Korean enough to like cook Korean food, or like feel like I have comfort in like doing that for like other people. And I didn't read any of the comments for the story because I'm always too scared to do that. So I usually make my dad read the comments, but he was saying that somebody was like, oh, I'm Mexican American. I feel the same way. And so I think it was like really cool to hear like people relating with this story of like kind of feeling like like imposter syndrome. That was much more universal than I thought. And I think the editors at the Times like definitely saw that in a way that I didn't, because I think that's why they considered the story for the front page. It was a really like cool, like windy, crazy story to report, but it was like really fun for me. And I think it was cool to see people connect with it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that one of the things that, for better or for worse, probably for worse, people talk about a lot with food in the United States and immigrant food, and I think especially Asian food, is this idea of authenticity.
Mhm.
And like something being authentic is like the best thing that a food from a different country could possibly be considered to be. And I think what was so great about that story is that like there's this trap of authenticity that I think everyone find themselves falling into if you're a part of a community from a diaspora, like in this case, if you are an adoptee from that community. And so it kind of is on one extreme version of that, but then it ties into like so many other experiences that people have.
Mhm.
So on the other side of the spectrum, maybe of stories, I want to talk about cute food.
Yes, I had so much fun working on that story.
This is your most recent taste story that was super fun. And honestly, I would have assigned it just from like getting a subject line that was about wanting to talk about cute food. Because I think a lot of people who follow food creators on Instagram maybe are kind of seeing versions of this. Could you maybe define what you consider to be cute food and why you wanted to write about it?
Cute food is pretty wide ranging. Like I feel like that there's like a couple of different ways that I think about it. I think it's food that when you see it, you're just like, this is adorable. Like you
Mhm.
have this like verbal, physical reaction to it, that it's like this thing that you want to like squeeze. And I think that kind of also, I think, allows it to be like cute food is like what you think is cute too, which might be different for everyone. But what made me particularly think about this was like I was seeing people like Jen Monroe from like Bad Taste, who had, is making these landscapes of food and dips, and like she's making these little families of like cucumbers and like a quail baby, and like they all like live in
Crudité
this like,
forest.
yeah, it's like it's this like community of fruits and vegetables, or mainly vegetables, that are all together. Or like Celine YRS, I think is her handle, but she makes like these more kind of like cartoony, like cute versions of food. So she has like a tamago sushi that looks like a bumblebee. And so I think like there's this kind of wide range of like more sort of like abstract, like, but still makes you feel like it's something cute, and something more that's like on the nose, but like a cartoonish version of like the world cute that I was seeing in food on Instagram, and also in restaurants too. But I think I was just noticing, I was seeing like, oh, this is so cute about food that I was seeing more recently, and that it was also more specifically savory food,
Mhm.
which I don't think is a way that chefs or like creators historically have been like thinking about manipulating food to make it look cute, or not even like manipulating it, but like presenting it in this kind of like curated way so that it evokes like cuteness. Like I hadn't really seen that before. And also the chefs that you were telling me about, See You Soon in Toronto, their food, when you were showing it to me, I was like, oh, that strikes me as very cute also.
Yeah, I think what was interesting to me about the pitch was the focus on savory, because I think it's true that for a long time, pastry chefs have done a lot of things that are, sweetly detailed or intricate
Hmm.
in that kind of way. But to have it be savory food, and I think also to have it be not just online, but like in restaurants, in pop ups, I think that I receive a lot of pitches about TikTok trends or people making stuff online. And I do think food is meant to be eaten. So like even though the people that make the food on Instagram are probably eating it after they take the photos, I don't think it necessarily says this much about food culture compared to like a restaurant or a pop-up or some kind of way that people can be eating
Mm.
food. And I think it was interesting because you talked about how partially it's maybe due to the dynamic of people that are in kitchens that it is possible that like cute savory food is being entertained as serious food as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like this was another one of those stories that I worked on, and then I was like, okay, does it have legs? And so then I just thought a lot about it and had all these like weird notes on my like Google Docs. Like I feel like I'm not like a notes app person. I think I like to like sit at a computer and like type.
Hmm.
But I had like all these like really strange thoughts that I just wrote on one Google Doc, and then as I like was talking to people, like that doc got longer because I was thinking about like, oh, what is it about like cute that why haven't we seen it as often, or why is it something that like even when I say it kind of sheepishly, and I think I realize like cute, it wasn't as historically hasn't been an aesthetic that's like respected.
I mean, it's a dismissive word that people will say when you work
Mhm.
hard on something. They'll say, "Oh, that's cute," and that's
Yeah.
not a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. So I think then it was interesting to see like a lot of these chefs and creators, like even though I think they're not for a lot of them, they weren't like intentionally trying to be like, this is cute. It was just coming out of them naturally. And they were like leaning into it in terms of like, oh, we want people to have like a certain experience where like our food is playful and it's not like you feel like you're afraid of like cutting into it because you're going to destroy this beautiful thing. It's more like, oh, we want this thing to be like interacting with you and you feel comfortable to like dig into it and maybe even encouraged to like destroy it.
Yeah, and it does fit into the whole cuteness aggression thing that you
Mhm.
touch on, which is like when you see a chubby baby leg that looks like rolls and then you want to eat it. I
Yeah.
feel that way all the time.
Yeah, or like I have a lot of nieces right now and I'm always like, "Oh my gosh, I want to squeeze like your cheek or you squeeze like your arm and stuff." Yeah, that was really interesting cuz I was just doing so much research on like cuteness and like the psychology of cuteness, and I think it's really interesting that a lot of it has to do with like there's like this primal part of like a lot of our definition for cuteness comes from like babies, and we have to like view them as like being cute or else like we wouldn't take care of them. But that there's this like on the other end of the spectrum, it's like, oh, something can be so overwhelmingly cute that you like it kind of makes you want to destroy it in a sense. And um the cuteness aggression is from like this Yale study that was explaining that like, oh, cuteness aggression is actually like kind of a way to make you so that when you're like entranced by the cuteness of something, by you doing like the little squeeze of the leg or like pinch of the cheek or like just saying like, oh, this is so cute, you kind of snap out of it so that then you're able to take care of the cute thing that's probably helpless and like does need your help.
So basically, if I want to put a baby's foot in my mouth, I should do that.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not like a psychologist, so I don't know if I can
If I know the
give
baby,
information.
maybe, not a
Yeah,
strange
not a
baby.
stranger's baby. Yeah, ask the parent for permission.
I do think you see so many videos where people refer to babies as like marshmallows or dumplings or cute things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if there are any like pet topics that you are looking for an excuse to write about.
Oh, I think you know some of them. For sure, anime.
Yes.
I've been working on a pitch about anime, and I probably shouldn't like say too much, but I don't really care. It's like I want to write a story about anime getting more mainstream. Like I feel like there's a time where when I was into anime in high school and part of like the really lame anime club for a while, like it was not a cool thing to talk about and it was not a cool thing to be telling your friends you're going to like anime conventions. And then even at that point, like I kind of that interest like fizzled out by the time I got to college. But maybe like 10 years ago I started watching more anime again, and it was mainly because of my husband Travis. And I actually didn't want to start watching it. I was like, "Oh, this is like lame." But then he showed me like various different like genres of anime, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is an amazing way of storytelling." And then I got like right into it again. But I feel like I've just been noticing like more people are like watching it, like whether it's like Michael B. Jordan, who's like literally taking like fight scenes from, or like not literally, I think he's taking a lot of inspiration from things like Dragon Ball Z to like inform like Creed 3. Is that the latest one that came out?
Yeah. Also, I can't remember his name, but one of the big sprinters in the Summer Olympics
Yeah.
on the US team who was running with was it a Dragon Ball Z card?
He had, yeah, Noah Lyles. He had Yu-Gi-Oh cards that he
Oh,
would pull out. Yeah, so I just feel like there's a lot of people who are really into anime and it's like actually becoming much cooler. There's also like been in the past like huge fashion collabs with like Louis Vuitton and I think like Jujutsu Kaisen, or I might be lying about that one. But I feel like there's like
well, even
more.
cute food is, I think, certainly in part due to the way that food looks so delicious in anime and
Yeah,
like
it looks like
Miyazaki
so much
movies.
better.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I want to like do a story about that. I have like a pitch kind of ready to go, but I probably should update it. But that's like what I really want to write about.
Well, I don't really watch anime, but I think that if you wrote about it, I would feel the need to dip back in.
Okay,
So
great.
I'm manifesting that. Okay, at least to close today, this is taste. We ask guests about their taste. So to close, I'm going to play a little taste check with you. I'll give you a category and you'll just tell me the first answer that pops into your head.
All right.
Okay, your favorite New York City occasion restaurant.
That's a mix.
Your favorite like casual New York City restaurant.
Chiquito.
Your favorite bakery here in the city.
Borough when it's open. They have very particular hours.
Yeah, definitely check on Instagram. Your favorite item of summer produce?
Oh, it's gotta be tomatoes.
Like heirloom tomatoes?
Yeah, I feel like in, New York, it's Sun Golds, but in California, I had these ones that were called Mountain Magic. Definitely not Magic Mountain because that's the theme park that I grew up near, but those ones were so good. They're, like, seasoned,
Wow.
but they're like little red tomatoes.
Okay, I'll look for those.
The Santa Monica Farmers Market has it.
Okay. Your go-to bodega snack?
Combos.
Okay, what's your bagel order?
I like a everything bagel with scallion cream cheese, untoasted.
A now closed restaurant that you wish you could bring back from the dead?
Oh my gosh, I would love to bring back Fung Tu. That was Jonathan Wu's Cantonese restaurant. It was really like imaginative and fun. I had never had food like that. I thought he was doing so many cool things there. It was ahead of its time.
Your favorite cookbook to cook from these days?
I have been cooking from, I don't know what they're called, but they're these like funny, like thin magazine like cookbooks that are made for like housewives in Japan. But they're like all Japanese styled pastas. So it's like Napa cabbage with like a bunch of parm and stuff, or like a shiso and like ume pasta. So I've been enjoying cooking from those. It's just been hard because I have to use Google Translate to cook them.
They sound really cool. Are they vintage or are they contemporary?
No, they're contemporary.
Oh, I'm picturing like they were very popular mail order kind of catalogs in the 60s here in America that would have recipes.
Maybe I should show you them. They're like, they feel like fancy magazines.
The most underrated piece of kitchen equipment?
Wooden chopsticks.
Something that you will never make from scratch?
Bread.
And finally, a fictional food scene, like book, movie, TV, that you wish you could eat?
The beginning of Spirited Away, when Chihiro's parents turn into pigs, but I wouldn't want to turn into a pig.
Honestly, I think I would risk turning into a pig to get to eat that food. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Eliza, how are you doing? You are in Los Angeles, California right now. How's it going?
It's good. I was woken up by an earthquake, which is a very LA way to start the day. So I'm feeling back in my California roots for sure.
Wait, did you actually like get up and like leave your home and like shelter, or like how does it work? Explain.
One definitely should take shelter underneath a table or something sturdy. And I did get an alert to do that, but it didn't feel that big to me. So I just stayed in bed. It was, I guess, a 4.8. I would say maybe I don't get out of bed for anything less than a 5. So I just, tried to ignore it.
That's so great. What's your first thing, LA edition?
My first LA thing is that I got to go to Funky for dinner last night, which is Evan Funky's newest restaurant. I've been wanting to go for a while. It was a little birthday celebration for my mom. It was her actual birthday when we went, not the New York pre-birthday festivities. And I got just kind of a ton of end of summer produce being explored in really cool ways. Sweet corn agnolotti, which is always a favorite of mine. A late summer panzanella with like maybe some of the best tomatoes I've had all summer, and burrata and like big hunks of bread, fried squash blossoms that were stuffed with cheese. Also, this special pizza that they were doing that had really beautiful prosciutto and figs. And it all was just kind of a really special way, I think, to celebrate being in LA and with my mom as well. So that was my first thing. What's your first thing, Matt?
Well, backing up, I have a few questions. Was the Funk Master in the house?
I did see him around the dining room. He definitely, I think he was running Expo, so he seemed busy, but he was definitely present.
Great description of the food. His fresh pasta has always been acclaimed, and really, I can't wait to check out Funky. I've been to Mother Wolf and Felix myself. But okay, what's the vibe check? What's the dining room like? This is a very tough reservation. It's a very cool restaurant and hot restaurant right now.
Yeah, it's definitely giving like a Beverly Hills occasion restaurant. You walk in and there's this glass case that there's 2 people, busy making different hand-shaped pasta inside of and rolling out the dough, which is always fun to see. And then the dining room itself is full of a lot of like very notable contemporary art. I'm assuming there must be an investor who has a great art collection that they wanted to show off or something, because you walk in and there's Warhol prints and Basquiat and like all sorts of work like that. And then this big mirrored dining room. And we saw maybe three birthdays happening last night when we were there. So it definitely feels like a pasta temple that is for a special meal.
Well, thanks for that like vibe check. And Evan, we've been talking to Evan's team, but having him on the show, and maybe like you and I will do a joint interview with him. I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah, I definitely think it's really interesting how the menu is divided up. There's kind of two different pasta sections. One is the ones that are being, rolled out. The other one is kind of completely by hand. And I feel like it's rare to see a place that just dedicates so much of their menu to pasta. So that's always really fun to get to experience. Matt, what's your first thing?
Eliza, it's interesting. We've been talking about NA beer for the past year, and Jordan Michael Milton wrote a terrific piece about it, and I'll link to it. But like, I posted a few images from Untitled Art NA, and I got my gram blew up. Like, a lot of people love this brand, and I wanted to make sure all of our listeners knew about it, and I'll tell you a little bit about it here. It's brewed outside Madison, Wisconsin, and to many, it channels iconic styles in the way that Athletic does. So like there's definitely like a Mexican light, there's an Italian style, there's some West Coast IPA, but like for whatever reason, and really this is an arbitrary choice. It just tastes a little better. It hits a little stronger when you're going into those uber hoppy beers, but I have to say I love the Italian style from Untitled Art. I also love their Oktoberfest. And I want to try some of their seasonal brews. And you know what? Me, you, and Clayton got to go to Madison earlier this year. Man, I just want to go back to Madison and check out their tasting room.
Yeah, I feel like it is such an exciting time to be in the NA beer space, and certainly getting into fall when I feel like maybe you want something that's a little hoppier or more of the Oktoberfest vibe. That sounds like a really great one to be thinking of.
That's Untitled Art NA. You can order it online. The cool thing about NA is you can have it shipped directly to your house. No weird signatures required. So I love it. What's your next LA three things?
My next LA thing is that I went to an ice cream parlor that has maybe the best name of any ice cream parlor I've ever been to. It's called Fluffy McClouds. Have you heard of this?
I haven't. Tell me about it. Sounds great.
It is in the east side. It is by the operator of El Prado, and it's directly across the street from that bar. But instead of being a kind of sceney bar, it's a very LA take on an old school style ice cream parlor. I believe it opened in 2023, and they do banana split, affogatos, just kind of scoops with hot fudge, whatever you want. They do a couple of interesting things in terms of how the ice cream parlor itself operates. First of all, is that they don't have any plastic spoons or cups that you can use. You can either get a cone to go, or you can dine in and they give you your ice cream in an old school chilled silver dish, which I really like.
Ooh, I love that. I love like a silver. I love like metal platters for ice cream. It bucks the glass bowls that we're so used to.
Yeah, it's really nice to kind of sit up at the counter there. They also have like a whole range of supplements that you can buy to accompany your ice cream if you are so inclined. You can get like your daily multivitamin or collagen or chlorophyll or turmeric is on the menu as well, which I think is kind of funny
Kind
and
of. It sounds
unexpected.
ridiculous. I mean,
I mean, I think why not, you know?
no, you're right. I'm not a hater. I think it's like any originality in the ice cream space speaks to my true heart, my ice cream loving heart. Can I just jump in and say, have you been to Scoops ever? That's in like the north
No, I
side of
haven't.
K-Town. It's been there since like 2014, and that's probably my favorite LA ice cream. It's called Scoops.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I think for me, this was just like a really fun stop off. I was meeting some friends, actually at El Prado across the street. And so I figured I'd get some ice cream. And I finally got my corn ice cream, which is a flavor that I've been seeking out all summer. I did a scoop of corn and a scoop of pistachio. I will say I was expecting the ice cream to be a little bit fluffier considering the name of the parlor, but it was really delicious, and just kind of a fun place to check out. They stay open until I believe midnight, which is late for an ice cream parlor in LA. And I like that there's this kind of later night hangout spot option that doesn't involve alcohol.
What good, clean fun. I love it.
Yeah, definitely. What's your next thing?
My next thing is, Eliza, my reading journey continues. Listener, if you're this far, you might have followed along. I've started to read again. I've started to read books, and it's really a beautiful thing. And I got to read The Friday Afternoon Club by Griffin Dunn. It's a memoir. Do you know who Griffin Dunn is? Have you heard of that name?
No, I don't think so.
Griffin Dunn is the son of Dominic Dunn. He, well known of Vanity Fair and crime reporting, also a Hollywood producer. Griffin is many things. He is an actor. He starred in After Hours, which is one of Martin Scorsese's, I would say, most underrated films. And Clayton, jump in for a sec. I'm going to introduce Clayton Gumbert, our producer and host of a great podcast, B.O. Boys, about film. What is your assessment of After Hours?
Oh, I mean, it's a great film. I think it's a great New York film if you're into that sort of thing. It just shows that downtown 80s New York in a way that I think everybody is always missing that, even though it was maybe a scary time to be living here. But I think if you want to go back to that time, it's a great movie to watch.
That's a great call, and I think of Warriors as well, more of an uptown movie, but similar grittiness. So Griffin, in this really compelling, page-turning memoir, writes about his early life, living in Hollywood, living in Beverly Hills, actually, and rubbing shoulders with like Sean Connery, who saved him from drowning as an 8-year-old. He has lots of like Humphrey Bogart references, and then he kind of jumps to New York, where he kind of his theater career takes off, and he talks about living with Carrie Fisher, who he's best friends with. And really the heart of this book, and it really is the heart, is him reflecting on the murder of his sister, Dominique Dunn, who was also quite an accomplished young actress. And Dominique Dunn wrote about this memorably for Vanity Fair. But this is a different side of it. It's from Griffin's point of view, and it talks about the judicial system at the time and how it was really, really fucked up. And honestly, if you love Hollywood, you love old New York, and you love this guy who obviously he's name dropping a lot, but it's not in a way that's sleazy or weird. It's actually very appropriate because this guy has lived an extraordinary life. I'm hoping to have him on the show. I've talked to his folks, and we're working on something for next year. But I just think if you're into like The Kid Stays in the Picture with like the Robert Evans documentary of years ago, if you like that older Hollywood, from 60s into the 70s into the 80s, terrific read, The Friday Afternoon Club.
Oh, I love that. I'll have to add it to my list. I'm always looking for more New York focused reading.
Absolutely. What's your last thing?
My last LA thing is tacos, of course. I went to a taco stand that I hadn't been to in a long time, and it was even better than I had remembered. It doesn't have a name as far as I know, but if you are near Venice and you're going to the Whole Foods on Lincoln and Rose, which I think is a pretty notable landmark in that part of LA, there are some guys that have a stand set up out in front. There's a big red awning that you can look for. There's kind of a couple stands side by side, but the one with the red awning is just doing really great al pastor. They have like a trompo on the sidewalk that they're just shaving it off of. They also have lingua and buche and some other cuts. But I was just kind of doing a post airport drive by and pulled over because I was hungry, and I just thought it was really solid and a great place to check out if you're on the west side.
Love hearing that West Side pick, and definitely I've done the land to LAX, drive to the nearest taco truck or restaurant, and it's always a great move. I love that you're on top of the taco scene in LA. It's always a pleasure to hear your take.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard for me to not want to eat tacos wherever I am, but especially in LA, and I'm sure it will not be the last taco rec I have. What's your last thing?
Well, my last thing is I haven't mentioned this on the show. I've linked to it in our Friday newsletter, which you should be subscribing to. But OMG, the show Industry, season 3, it is at the top of its game. Are you watching Industry, Eliza?
No, I feel like I'm late to the game at this point.
You know what? We're in that like season 3. When you hear a show is great at season 3, there's just like you just can't really jump into the first 2 seasons. I'll say the sensibility, it's a shorter seasons, and really the sensibility is so of the moment, and Conrad K and Mickey Down are the creators, and they have made a show that I would say blends obvious comparison to Succession, a very popular show, but also like there's some like Michael Lewis happening in there, like Michael Lewis's great early financial reporting and like the color he brought from the 80s credit crisis and the meltdown of like savings and loan. And also like Tom Wolfe. I think of like Tom Wolfe. There's like some real darkness in the show that Tom Wolfe covers so well in his writing. And the cast is so excellent. Marissa Abella and Ken Lung plays a guy, Eric Tao. It's just like at the center of a lot of the plot. And Ken is he's a stage actor here. He's been on, had bit parts on television. High Maintenance is a super memorable episode that I love, where he plays like a veterinarian who is just dabbling in some of the vet drugs, and also doing a little bit of like mushroom tripping during his appointments. That is such a memorable episode of High Maintenance. And lastly, I want to see more David Johnson. He played Gus in season 1 and 2. We haven't seen him in season 3, but bring back David. What a terrific actor. Lastly, I'll say actually is Kit Harington of Game of Thrones. He is at the center of the season. And the show, just to zoom out, centers around a bank called Pierpoint and all the young staff and older staff, and the way they blow off steam. I'll just say it like that. There's a lot of pressure when you work in high finance, and there's some blowing off of steam, and really the writing is as good as ever. Check out Industry, watch the show. I love it so much.
Yeah, I have to check it out. I feel like everyone has been talking about it, and this maybe pushed me over. So thank you for sharing it as one of your 3 things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your LA 3 things, Eliza. Great to hear from you.
You too.
This is Taste is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Eliza Abarbanel. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things happening.